A man in a suit boards a plane, hands the stewardess a note, and hours later vanishes into a stormy night with $200,000 in cash. No body. No parachute. No trace. This isn't a movie, it's the real-life mystery of D.B. Cooper. And tonight, on Graveyard of Secrets, we're reopening the case that's haunted investigators for over 50 years. Could this be the perfect crime, or the perfect illusion? On the cold afternoon of November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a quiet man in a dark suit boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 in Portland, bound for Seattle. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, but the world would come to know him as D.B. Cooper, thanks to a reporting mistake that stuck forever. Mid-flight, Cooper calmly handed a note to a flight attendant. She assumed it was a lonely man's phone number and pocketed it. But Cooper leaned close and whispered, "Miss, you'd better read that. I have a bomb." In his briefcase, he showed her wires and red sticks. No panic. No shouting. Just chilling precision. His demands were clear. $200,000 in cash. 4 parachutes. And a fuel truck ready in Seattle. For 2 tense hours, passengers sipped drinks, unaware they were flying inside a hijacking. When Flight 305 landed, Cooper exchanged 36 lives for a bag of ransom money, still calm, still polite. The passengers were released, but Cooper kept the crew and ordered the plane back into the night sky, heading south. At 10,000 feet, with the rear staircase lowered, he made his move. Somewhere over the dense forests of Washington, he jumped, disappearing into the stormy darkness with $200,000 strapped to his body. Despite thousands of FBI agents, search teams, and endless theories, D.B. Cooper was never found. Was he a skydiving expert who landed safely and vanished into civilian life? Or did the dangerous jump kill him, leaving only money to be scattered by rivers and trees? In 1980, a boy found rotting bundles of Cooper's ransom cash along the Columbia River, deepening the mystery. Did Cooper die that night? Or did he plant the money to throw investigators off his trail? Over 50 years later, the case remains the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history, a real-life ghost story at 10,000 feet. The date was November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, and airports across America were buzzing with holiday travelers. Portland International Airport was no exception. Families clutched suitcases, children tugged on coats, and the smell of jet fuel mixed with the cold bite of late autumn air. Among the crowd was a man who stood out precisely because he didn't stand out. He was of average build, mid-40s, wearing a dark suit, neatly pressed trousers, a black tie, and polished shoes. Nothing about him screamed danger. He carried a single briefcase, no checked luggage. At 2:50 p.m., he purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, cash, no questions asked. The name on the ticket read Dan Cooper. To the ticket agent, it was just another business traveler rushing to catch a short flight. Nobody paid him a second glance. Inside the bustling terminal, other passengers shuffled past him, eager to get home to turkey dinners and warm living rooms. Cooper waited calmly, lighting a cigarette at the gate, perfectly normal in an age when smoking lounges dotted every airport. His eyes stayed hidden behind dark sunglasses, scanning the room without betraying emotion. Flight 305, a Boeing 727, was preparing to board. It was a quick hop from Portland to Seattle, barely 30 minutes in the air. Businessmen reading newspapers, mothers holding restless toddlers, an entirely ordinary flight on an ordinary afternoon. When Cooper stepped onto the plane, he greeted the flight attendants politely, voice even and unhurried. He slid into seat 18C, near the rear of the aircraft, where he would have easy access to the plane's distinctive rear staircase, an engineering detail that few passengers even knew existed. He ordered a bourbon and soda before takeoff, as calm as if he were in a hotel bar. The flight attendant would later recall that he was soft-spoken, respectful, and oddly charming, nothing like the image of a man about to commit one of America's most daring crimes. As the engines roared to life and the plane lifted into the cloudy November sky, rain streaked the windows. Turbulence rocked the cabin slightly, the kind of gloomy weather no traveler enjoys. But in seat 18C, Cooper seemed completely unfazed, sipping his drink and quietly watching the gray horizon. No one around him suspected that under his neatly folded jacket, inside that unassuming briefcase, was something that would change aviation history forever. Passengers adjusted their seatbelts, flight attendants checked trays, completely unaware of the calm storm sitting just a few rows behind them. It was the last normal moment Flight 305 would ever know. The flight leveled off smoothly, the seatbelt light flicked off, and passengers settled in for what they thought would be an uneventful ride. The flight attendants moved down the aisle offering drinks and snacks, smiling in the practiced way that comes with routine. Nothing about this flight felt unusual. In seat 18C, the man calling himself Dan Cooper pressed the call button. When flight attendant Florence Schaffner approached, she noticed the polite, almost businesslike expression on his face. He didn't look nervous. He didn't even look excited. Just steady. Calm. Cooper handed her a small folded note, written in neat block letters. She assumed, like many flight attendants did in those days, that it was a phone number from a lonely traveler. Without reading it, she slipped it into her pocket with a practiced smile, ready to move on. But Cooper didn't let her. His voice was soft, steady, and deliberate as he leaned toward her and said words that sent an invisible chill through the air. "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner froze for just an instant, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Cooper's expression didn't change. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. Slowly, she unfolded the paper. The message inside was simple and direct: "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit next to me." Trying to appear calm herself, Schaffner slid into the empty seat beside him. Cooper quietly opened his briefcase just far enough for her to see a tangle of red cylinders and wires attached to a battery. There was no dramatic flourish, no attempt to frighten her. He showed her only what he needed to prove his words. Then, as if he were discussing business over coffee, Cooper outlined his demands. His voice never rose. He asked for $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. No police, no tricks, no negotiation. He was polite. Almost unnervingly polite. When Schaffner looked shaken, he reassured her softly. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want the money." It wasn't the tone of a man out of control. It was the tone of someone who had planned this down to the last detail. Schaffner nodded, forcing herself to stay composed. She went to the cockpit with the note, her footsteps deliberately steady so the other passengers wouldn't suspect anything. Behind her, Cooper sat back in his seat, cigarette glowing faintly in the dim cabin, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. From that moment forward, Flight 305 was no longer just another commuter hop to Seattle. It was a flying chessboard, and D.B. Cooper had just made his opening move. In the cockpit, Florence Schaffner delivered the note to Captain William Scott and First Officer Bob Radazak. They glanced at each other in disbelief, then at the quiet man sitting just 20 feet behind them. This wasn't a bluff they could afford to ignore. The captain contacted Seattle Air Traffic Control, and within minutes the message traveled up the chain to FBI headquarters. There was no panic on board, not yet, but every decision from that moment forward carried the weight of 36 lives. Cooper's demands were simple, almost absurdly so. $200,000 in cash. 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes and 2 reserve. A refueling truck on standby in Seattle. No heroes. No police ambush. No dye packs hidden in the cache. Why 4 parachutes? Investigators would later speculate, if Cooper asked for only one, authorities might assume he intended to jump alone and sabotage it. But 4 implied the possibility of hostages, an insurance policy against any trickery. Even in that small detail, Cooper showed meticulous planning. The message from ground control was clear: cooperate, comply, buy time. Seattle police scrambled to gather unmarked bills, while the FBI raced to find the specific parachutes Cooper requested, civilian type, steerable, not the standard military rigs most agencies kept on hand. Meanwhile, Schaffner returned to Cooper's row, heart pounding but face steady. She informed him that the crew was relaying his instructions and that authorities were working to meet his needs. Cooper simply nodded, as if approving a routine business transaction. When she asked if he had any preferences for how the money should be packed, he replied with unnerving precision, "In a knapsack, no tricks. And I want the plane ready to fly again the moment I have it." He even specified how he wanted the rear stairway deployed after takeoff. Flight attendants noted his composure. He wasn't drinking nervously. He wasn't sweating. In fact, he ordered a second bourbon and soda, calmly tipping the glass back as if he were sitting in an airport lounge. He was polite, even courteous, one crew member later recalled. He wasn't like the movies. He didn't yell or threaten. He was just in control. Every few minutes, the cockpit updated him through Schaffner, "The money is being gathered. The parachutes are being delivered. We'll land soon." Cooper never hurried them, never wavered in his instructions. Down below, on the tarmac in Seattle, police and FBI agents prepared for the strangest hostage negotiation in aviation history. Above the clouds, cruising at 10,000 feet, one man in seat 18C dictated every move with a calmness that was far more frightening than rage. As Flight 305 descended towards Seattle-Tacoma Airport, the atmosphere inside the cabin remained strangely calm. Passengers were blissfully unaware that their lives were being bargained for at 10,000 feet. To them, it was just a short flight delayed by bad weather. Cooper, however, knew exactly what was happening below. On the tarmac, police vehicles and FBI agents waited with a carefully prepared ransom, $200,000 in $20 bills and 4 parachutes packed as he had requested. The stairs would be lowered manually to deliver the items. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom with a standard announcement about a routine stop for refueling. Not one passenger suspected that their routine stop was actually a payoff exchange. Flight attendants moved through the aisle with practiced smiles, masking the tension boiling behind the scenes. When the jet finally rolled to a stop on the dimly lit runway, the passengers stayed seated, unaware of the swarm of law enforcement gathered just out of sight. Cooper was careful. He ordered the crew to keep all window shades drawn so no one could see inside, or outside. Within minutes, an airline official walked up the mobile stairs carrying the knapsack stuffed with cash and the 4 parachutes. The delivery was made quietly, discreetly, with no visible sign of a trap. Cooper double-checked the contents with methodical precision, flipping through bundles of bills to ensure they were unmarked. Once satisfied, he turned to the crew and issued his next command in the same even voice he'd used from the beginning. "Get the passengers off the plane. All of them. Now." One by one, 36 bewildered travelers were ushered down the stairway and onto waiting buses. They left with no clue that their flight had been hijacked, many only learned about it hours later from television news. Cooper made no threats, no dramatic speeches. He simply released them, exactly as promised. Flight attendants stayed behind, along with the pilots, at Cooper's insistence. They were his crew for the next leg of this dangerous game. Even as passengers left safely, the most daring part of Cooper's plan hadn't even begun. After the last civilian stepped onto the tarmac, the cabin door was sealed again. The plane sat briefly in eerie silence. No chatter, no movement from the outside world. Just the hum of the engines and the steady voice of one man still calling every shot. With the passengers gone, Cooper leaned back in seat 18C, unbothered by the FBI perimeter outside. He wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The hijacking wasn't ending in Seattle. It was only entering its next, far more dangerous phase. The tarmac lights of Seattle-Tacoma glowed dim against the cold November rain. While most of the airport had no idea a hijacking was unfolding, the authorities watching from a distance could feel the pressure building. Cooper was calm, but the next phase of his plan was dangerous, not just for him, but for everyone still on board. With the passengers gone, only the pilots and 2 flight attendants remained. Cooper walked them through his instructions with quiet authority, as though he'd rehearsed every word. The Boeing 727 would take off again, but it wouldn't follow its original flight plan. Instead, it would fly south, toward Mexico City, at 10,000 feet and at minimum airspeed. He was deliberate. The landing gear would stay down, the cabin unpressurized, and the flaps partially extended. These conditions were highly unusual, even risky, but they ensured something Cooper needed, a stable, slow flight path at low altitude. When Captain William Scott objected that the plane couldn't make it all the way to Mexico without refueling, Cooper didn't flinch. "Fine," he said calmly. "We'll stop in Reno. But don't change anything else." The crew noted his attention to detail. Cooper seemed to know more about the aircraft than any ordinary passenger should. He even asked them to keep the rear stairway, the unique feature of the Boeing 727, lowered after takeoff. When Scott explained that doing so wasn't safe, Cooper agreed to deploy it only once they were airborne. With the ransom money and parachutes safely aboard, the jet engines roared to life again. FBI agents stood helplessly on the ground. They had no legal or tactical way to storm the aircraft without risking the crew's lives. Cooper had outmaneuvered them from start to finish. As the plane lifted off into the dark, rain-soaked sky at 7:40 p.m., the mood inside was surreal. The cockpit crew followed Cooper's precise orders. Altitude, speed, direction, everything exactly as he wanted. In the cabin, the lights were dimmed, creating long shadows that flickered with every flash of lightning outside. Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow, the 2 flight attendants, exchanged glances. They could see the outline of Cooper in his seat, tie loosened, sunglasses still on, briefcase nearby, like a man on a routine business trip rather than an international fugitive in the making. Below them, Washington's forests stretched endlessly into darkness. The radar blips showed nothing unusual to the air traffic controllers who tracked them, just another flight moving south on schedule. But inside Flight 305, every mile brought them closer to something no hijacker had ever attempted before. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Cooper would make his move. And no one on board, or on the ground, could predict when. Rain lashed against the fuselage as Flight 305 droned steadily southward, following Cooper's precise instructions. The jet held at 10,000 feet, crawling at barely 200 knots, far below its usual speed. The engines strained against the drag of lowered flaps and landing gear, but Cooper seemed completely at ease. Tina Mucklow, one of the flight attendants, moved cautiously down the narrow aisle to check on him. Cooper was seated as calmly as ever, his black tie loosened, a cigarette glowing faintly in the dim cabin. The knapsack of cash sat beside him, heavy and quiet, like a second passenger. He didn't seem nervous. He didn't even glance at the window, where rain streaks blurred the endless darkness outside. Around 8 p.m., Cooper gave his next order. He wanted the cabin cleared. The flight attendants were instructed to join the pilots in the cockpit and close the door. "Stay there," he told them firmly but politely. "I'll take care of the rest." As Tina stepped away, she glanced back one last time. Cooper had pulled on a parachute and strapped the heavy bag of cash to his body with practiced hands. He moved like someone who knew what he was doing, no fumbling, no hesitation. Moments later, the crew in the cockpit felt the aircraft pitch slightly. Warning lights blinked as the rear staircase was lowered midair, something Boeing had never intended for in-flight use. A sudden rush of wind howled through the cabin as pressure dropped, the noise so loud it reverberated through the locked cockpit door. At 8:13 p.m., the entire aircraft jolted violently, as if a load had shifted, or a man had disappeared into the night. Captain William Scott glanced at his instruments, startled, but said nothing. No one opened the cockpit door. No one dared. Outside, the world was pitch black, broken only by sheets of cold rain and flashes of distant lightning. Somewhere below, the thick forests of southern Washington and northern Oregon waited, an unforgiving landscape of rivers, mountains, and endless trees. Cooper had vanished. One moment he was seated calmly with bourbon in hand, the next he was a ghost in the storm, falling through the night sky with $200,000 strapped to his chest. The crew, following strict instructions, kept flying south toward Reno. They had no idea whether Cooper had survived the jump, or whether he was even still on the plane at all. By the time they landed, the rear staircase still hung open, flapping slightly in the wind, empty and silent. No one on board would ever see him again. The moment Flight 305 landed in Reno, the FBI swarmed the aircraft. Agents boarded quickly, guns drawn, expecting a possible hostage standoff. But there was no Cooper. No briefcase. No parachute. Only an empty seat, a discarded black tie, and the rear staircase still hanging loose like a silent clue. Search teams mobilized immediately. The FBI, local law enforcement, and even Army troops flooded into the rugged wilderness of southwestern Washington, where radar suggested Cooper might have jumped. Helicopters scanned the tree line. Dogs traced paths through freezing mud. Volunteers combed riverbanks, looking for any sign of the missing man, or his parachute. It was grueling work. The terrain was brutal, dense pine forests, steep ridges, and icy rivers swollen by heavy rain. If Cooper had survived the leap, he would have been drenched, freezing, and disoriented in pitch darkness. If he hadn't survived, his body could have been hidden by the wilderness forever. The FBI assumed it would be a matter of days before they found something, a body, a parachute, or at least a trail of cash. But day after day, the search turned up nothing. No footprints. No torn fabric. Not even a bill from the ransom package. It was as if Cooper had evaporated in midair. The lack of evidence baffled investigators. Even expert parachutists said Cooper's jump was nearly suicidal: low altitude, poor visibility, cold rain, and thick forest with almost no landing zone. No man could have survived that, some agents insisted. Others weren't so sure. The FBI interviewed hundreds of suspects in the weeks that followed: ex-convicts, paratroopers, missing persons, even airline employees. Leads poured in from across the country. Every time someone boasted in a bar about knowing Cooper, agents chased the rumor down. Every time a man disappeared without explanation, he became a suspect. But none fit perfectly. Months turned into years, and still there was no sign of the skyjacker or his cash. The only hard clues remained on the plane: Cooper's black tie clip, a few cigarette butts, and the fingerprints he may or may not have left behind. Nothing linked to an identity. Nothing solid enough to crack the case. The FBI even dragged rivers and searched lakes, convinced Cooper had drowned. No parachute surfaced. No body washed ashore. It was as though the forests had swallowed him whole, or he had simply walked out of them alive, cash in hand, and vanished into the world. By the end of the 1970s, the case had become legend, a mystery without a single solid answer. Some agents believed he was dead. Others quietly admitted they weren't sure anymore. But they all agreed on one thing: no hijacker had ever escaped like this before. It had been nearly 9 years since D.B. Cooper leaped from Flight 305 when an unexpected breakthrough electrified the FBI. In February 1980, on the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit with his father when he unearthed something strange: bundles of old, decaying cash buried in the sand. When agents rushed to the scene, they immediately recognized the brittle, moldy bills. Serial numbers matched the ransom money given to Cooper back in 1971. In total, $5,800 was recovered, 3 packets of $20 bills, still rubber-banded together despite years of exposure to water and mud. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Why had only part of the ransom appeared? If Cooper had buried it, why would he leave it behind? If he'd died in the wilderness, how did the money end up so far from the suspected drop zone? Some agents suspected the bills had washed downstream naturally. Others whispered that someone had planted them to mislead investigators. The area where the money surfaced, known as Tena Bar, wasn't even directly beneath the flight path. This baffled experts who had spent years plotting Cooper's probable jump location using radar data, wind direction, and aircraft speed. The discovery suggested either their calculations were wrong, or that Cooper had done something no one expected. Forensic analysts examined the bills closely. They'd been discolored and partially decomposed, yet the rubber bands holding them were still intact, a fact that didn't fit with a 9-year timeline. Some experts claimed the money couldn't have been sitting in open water for that long. Had it been buried later, by Cooper himself or someone else? The media exploded with speculation. Was Cooper still alive, living quietly somewhere, knowing that only a fraction of his cash had been discovered? Or had someone else stumbled across the loot years earlier, taken most of it, and left the rest behind to rot in the sand? The FBI launched an intensive search of the surrounding riverbanks, digging trenches and sifting through tons of soil, but no additional bills were ever found. The parachute didn't turn up. Neither did Cooper's body. The money discovery gave investigators a tantalizing taste of evidence, and then slammed the door shut again. Over time, this partial recovery became one of the most perplexing aspects of the case. It suggested Cooper's money hadn't simply scattered to the winds. It was deliberately or accidentally placed, but by whom? Some theorists proposed that Cooper didn't survive, and the bills drifted downstream over the years. Others believed the hijacker had staged it to make authorities believe he was dead. To this day, the bundles of cash from Tena Bar remain the only physical trace of the ransom ever recovered. No other bills from the heist ever surfaced in circulation, despite the FBI keeping their serial numbers on record and banks across the country scanning for them. The find confirmed only one thing: Cooper had indeed made it out of the plane with the money. Beyond that, the mystery only deepened, leaving investigators staring at a sandy riverbank that whispered clues, and mocked them with silence. As the years dragged on without a definitive answer, the FBI focused heavily on potential suspects, and the list was as colorful as it was controversial. Some were career criminals, others were military veterans, and a few were ordinary men who simply fit the vague description Cooper had been given by passengers and flight attendants. Yet, despite decades of work, no suspect was ever confirmed as the man who vanished into the night sky. One of the earliest names to emerge was Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Army veteran and helicopter pilot who carried out a similar skyjacking just 5 months after Cooper's heist. McCoy parachuted out of a plane with $500,000 and was later caught, convicted, and sent to prison, where he was killed during an escape attempt. Many investigators believed McCoy's crime was a copycat rather than the original, but some argued the similarities were too great to ignore. Another frequently mentioned suspect was Dwayne Weber, who allegedly confessed to his wife on his deathbed that he was D.B. Cooper. Weber had a criminal past and reportedly mentioned details of the case that were never public knowledge. However, no hard evidence ever tied him to the hijacking, and the FBI dismissed the claim after DNA testing on recovered cigarette butts failed to match. Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Orient flight attendant, also caught the Bureau's attention. His brother claimed Kenneth had admitted being Cooper, and Christensen's military background suggested he could have had the skills to survive the jump. Still, no direct evidence surfaced, and the case against him remained entirely circumstantial. Theories grew wilder as the investigation stalled. Some believed Cooper never survived the jump, perishing in the cold, wet wilderness with the ransom still strapped to his body. Others insisted he landed safely, disappeared into anonymity, and may have even returned to normal life, perhaps sitting quietly in a bar while watching his own legend grow on television. A number of suspects were investigated simply because they resembled the sketch drawn from eyewitness accounts. Men who bore dark suits, thin ties, or a passing resemblance to Cooper found themselves questioned, tracked, or harassed for years. The problem was that Cooper's description, a middle-aged man with ordinary features, fit thousands of people. Meanwhile, amateur sleuths and conspiracy theorists filled the gaps with speculation. Some argued Cooper was a former CIA operative using Cold War training to vanish completely. Others suspected he was a Boeing employee who knew the aircraft intimately. A few even suggested the hijacking was an inside job, staged to embarrass the airline or test airport security. Despite hundreds of leads, none led to a conclusive identification. Cooper's fingerprints never matched any of the suspect's prints on record. No definitive DNA sample was ever recovered from the tie he left behind. Every suspect brought forth by new books, documentaries, or self-proclaimed experts eventually hit a dead end. The longer the case went unsolved, the more it shifted from a criminal investigation to an enduring American mystery. FBI agents rotated out, aging witnesses forgot key details, and evidence deteriorated over time. Yet, every new suspect reignited hope that the puzzle might finally be solved. Even with the Bureau officially closing its investigation in 2016, theories continue to surface, each claiming to unmask the elusive hijacker who stepped off Flight 305 and disappeared forever. Decades after that rainy November night in 1971, the D.B. Cooper hijacking remains one of the most legendary unsolved crimes in American history. While other cases fade into obscurity, this one has only grown larger, fueled by books, documentaries, podcasts, and an online community of amateur detectives who refuse to let the mystery die. Part of its allure lies in Cooper himself, calm, polite, almost gentlemanly as he carried out a crime that could have ended in disaster. Witnesses recalled a man who never raised his voice, never harmed anyone, and even paid for his drink before jumping out of the Boeing 727. This unusual blend of danger and charm transformed him into something more than a criminal, a folk anti-hero. The fact that Cooper vanished without a trace turned him into a symbol of rebellion and freedom. In an age when surveillance was minimal and airports barely had metal detectors, his escape represented a kind of outlaw cleverness that fascinated the public. Cooper seemed to slip through the fingers of authority, disappearing into the wilderness as if swallowed by the earth. Over the years, pop culture has embraced the legend. References to Cooper appear in films, TV shows, songs, and even video games. His mysterious figure, a man in a dark suit, tie fluttering in the wind, leaping into the stormy night, has become an icon of audacious escape. Each retelling adds another layer of myth, making it harder to separate fact from fiction. Meanwhile, the FBI's official closure of the case in 2016 did little to cool public curiosity. Instead, it energized amateur sleuths who saw it as a challenge. Forums buzz with theories, photographs are compared against the famous composite sketch, and armchair investigators dissect every known detail, hoping to find the one clue everyone else missed. The physical evidence left behind has been studied endlessly. The black clip-on tie Cooper removed and left on his seat has been examined for DNA and microscopic particles. The $5,800 in ransom bills discovered along the Columbia River in 1980 remains one of the few tangible links to the crime. Yet these clues raise more questions than they answer. How did the money end up buried in the sand years later? Did Cooper survive long enough to spend the rest of the cash, or did he perish with it still strapped to his body? For many, the enduring mystery isn't just about identifying D.B. Cooper, it's about what he represents. He embodies an era when individuals could seemingly outwit entire federal agencies. In a time of political unrest and shifting cultural norms, Cooper's escape felt like a cinematic moment ripped from an adventure film, a real-life story of one man against the system. Generations too young to remember the hijacking firsthand have nonetheless kept the legend alive. True crime enthusiasts treat the case as a puzzle to be solved, while others romanticize it as a story that should never have an ending. The fewer facts that emerge, the more people fill the gaps with imagination, turning Cooper into everything from a disgruntled veteran to an innocent man wrongly suspected by fate. Each anniversary of the hijacking sparks renewed interest. New books are published, fresh documentaries air, and people gather in Washington and Oregon to trade theories. The legend has even spawned CooperCon, an annual gathering of enthusiasts who pore over FBI files and debate the meaning of the smallest clues. As the years pass, witnesses fade, and evidence grows cold, the D.B. Cooper case remains suspended between history and myth, a mystery that feels almost deliberately unsolvable, as if Cooper himself planned it that way. As the years rolled by, the trail of D.B. Cooper grew colder, yet his shadow only lengthened. Every theory seemed plausible, and impossible, all at once. Some swore he died in the wilderness, his parachute tangled in the treetops. Others believed he walked away that night, vanishing into a new life with a briefcase full of cash and a satisfied smile. But no matter how many leads emerged, they always ended in dead ends, a scrap of evidence here, a suspicious photograph there, but nothing conclusive. Even as technology advanced, even as the FBI combed through every clue, Cooper himself remained a ghost, untraceable, untouchable. And perhaps that's why the story endures. It's no longer just about one man leaping into a stormy sky, it's about what he represents: defiance, mystery, and the eternal question of whether some secrets are meant to stay hidden. To this day, somewhere between fact and legend, D.B. Cooper still falls through that endless night, vanishing into the wind, a man who refused to be caught, and a mystery that refuses to be solved. The man who leapt into the stormy night with $200,000 vanished without a trace, a ghost, a legend, a mystery that still haunts the skies. Who was D.B. Cooper, and did he ever truly escape? The answers may never come, but the secrets remain. Stay curious, and don't miss the next chilling story here on Graveyard of Secrets.